All right, thank you. I'm Jeffrey Henning with Afanova, and I am pleased to be presenting as part of the NewMR event on qualitative research. And my topic today is structuring qualitative results for maximum impact in concept testing. So I had the good fortune at a recent conference to talk with some qualitative researchers who were sharing with me some of the frustrations that they had felt in their work. And I don't know if you as a qualitative researcher have ever felt this, but have you ever felt you've given your clients this tremendous wealth of ideas for ideation sessions, of all this information, but unfortunately very few of those ideas were actually given serious consideration by your client? Did you feel like when they did look over all of the ideas, the ones they selected were kind of selected for ad hoc reasons, political reasons, for ones that sort of met some preconceived notions rather than some of the interesting insights that you had overturned? Those are certainly some frustrations that I've heard articulated in the past. And meanwhile, qualitative researchers have those frustrations, while for the ideation work that they do to go into new products, new brands, new packaging, many of those innovations fail to live up to their clients' expectations. These are sort of typical launch rates for the U.S. for consumer packaged goods. So the launch rate, how likely it was to be successful after 2 years in market. So only a quarter of the products that we looked at in the database were successful after 2 years, and they did about $9 million US in revenue over 2 years. So on the one hand, we've got all this information we're providing clients, and then on the other hand, the product innovations that they're doing aren't quite living up to expectations. Could those two facts be related in some way? So the way most projects like this work is the organization has identified some opportunity that they're hoping to address, and that might be messaging for an existing product that's slumping. They might have identified an unmet market need. Maybe their R&D folks have come up with a breakthrough in the lab, but they're not quite sure, well, how do we package this breakthrough for consumers? Maybe there's finding that an existing product that they have all of a sudden is resonating with a different target market than the usual one, and so how do they talk to that target market about the product? So there's an opportunity that's been identified. They've done some exploration. Typically they've worked with qualitative researchers to come up with ideas. Maybe they've reached out to their agency, their ad agency. They've looked at previous learnings. They've looked at insights from marketing. And as a result, they've come up with all kinds of ideas for insights, for benefit statements, for branding, for the positioning, products, imagery. So lots of very cool insights have come out of the research. And the challenge now is it's an embarrassment of riches. So they have all of these potential ideas, many of which came out of market research, and then they have to select a handful of ideas because their testing methodology typically is going to allow them to test 3, 4, 6, 8 ideas. So they have to narrow down this cornucopia to the few things that they're going to select. And then so they get customer feedback on those, and lo and behold, what often happens is they find out that the ideas that they selected perform averagely or do okay, but don't really seem the kind of thing you want to put a lot of money or time or energy behind. So then they decide, well, maybe we need to test this again. Maybe we tweak it first. If that doesn't work, maybe we go back to all of these ideas and see if there were some ideas we passed over that we should reintegrate into the concept testing. And this is a fairly classic process. I just actually heard it described today by a consumer insights researcher at a corporation. She was talking about this process, how they were using qualitative research from a number of methods, not only traditional focus groups, but also Facebook and a market research online community. And they would do this test and tweak process until they got an idea that they could go to market with. So that's the selection. The problem is, this takes a lot of time. It takes often an unpredictable amount of time because you're hopeful that it passes in the first round and that you selected good ideas, but it doesn't always work out that way. It can be cost-consuming and resource-consuming. And all of all of that work into refining it and launching it, and yet, you know, you have this question: how do you know that you actually selected the best of these ideas to present? So the typical process that we see has the ideation work, has selection, and it has testing. The interesting thing to me is that the ideation and the testing are research-driven, and so when you talk to most organizations about this type of work, they're like, hey, we did research. We did our qualitative up front to make sure we really understood everything that was going on, and then we did our quantitative at the back end to really vet what we picked as the top ideas to see how they did to other benchmarks. So, you know, it was a research-driven process. You know, maybe there's a problem with market research in general that we're not getting the breakthrough. And but really, it's that selection process where they're selecting from this wealth of ideas, where that's often an ad hoc decision. There's lots of reasons why it's an ad hoc decision. Consumers might have these great ideas that are unfeasible, can't be done by manufacturing. I was looking at one that was ideas for a food product where chemically they can't quite get everything to work the way consumers would like. There could be regulatory issues. So there's always a reason why certain ideas have to be skipped over. But then there are other ideas that probably should have been tested that weren't. So I was thinking of this as a research sandwich with nothing in the middle. You've got the research that started it in the ideation, the research testing that ended it, but there was no research in the middle to inform that selection decision. And is that an important thing? I think it is. And typically we've structured these types of innovation projects around taking all of these ideas and narrowing them down, narrowing them down, narrowing them down. And in fact, so that's the classic idea funnel. There's another model that people have been talking about, which is called the innovation rocket, where you actually kind of narrow down the ideas and then you blow them out again and you combine them, sort of the way in a rocket engine you have combustion and you have fuel and oxygen coming together. So that's why this rocket here narrows and then broadens up again in the conceptualization phase. So we actually have a white paper on this. If you go to apnova.com/innovation rocket, we go into the background of the rocket and some of its benefits in a little more detail than I have time here today. But during this process, one of the things we often do is we represent ideas as concepts. So we take those ideas that we had, we create a concept that represents what we think is the best of those ideas, and an organization might do 2 or 3 or 4 of these, but each one is meant to be sort of this holistic representation that they can take to the target customer, and the target customer is going to have a good idea of the innovation that's being planned. The common elements in these are things, it varies by the concept. For this one, we've got insights, we've got a product name, we've got message statements, we've got an illustration, pack, and product in different varieties. Interestingly, if you think of the concept as a structure for the information that you've gathered, and if you think about, so this one has 6 elements. If everyone we had one idea for, well, that's not very interesting, but we have 2 ideas for it all, then there's 36 elements in it. If you have 3 ideas for each, it expands exponentially, it's 216. If you have 4 ideas, it's 1,296. And if you had 7 ideas for each, by the time you did the math of all the possible combinations, you're close to 300,000, 279,000 combinations of ideas, far more than you could ever test. So here we have for this particular project, you can see we had 5 consumer insight statements, 7 product names, 6 taglines, and so forth. You multiply all these together, these 40 different variants. For some of them, you're showing 3 at a time, and there's 168,000 unique concepts. So that one concept that I'm showing you is just one in this very large space. Now, when you have a situation like this, when you're going from one concept to millions, then you're really not in concept testing anymore. You're in what's called concept optimization. Now, creating an innovation space like this is actually very easy to do when you're thinking of all the information that you've gathered and structured it. You just start with the traditional concept. Then but then you start grouping your qualitative research output as variance for each element. So for those of you who've dabbled in conjoint, it's attributes and levels. And then you can present it to the client as an outline. So hey, here's one element. Here's all the benefit statements we came up with based on the qualitative research to describe it. Here's another element with names that came out of other research. And so think about these as structures for this multidimensional innovation space rather than thinking of them as a couple concepts that we're going to test. And when you think of it in that way, then the process changes from selection, from this manual selection, to optimization. So you've got ideation, optimization, and testing. And concept optimization, you can use conjoint, you can use combinatorial optimization, evolutionary optimization, which AFANOVA does. There's different techniques out there. But now, instead of having this empty research sandwich that I talked about earlier, you're using research at all three phases. Now, does it actually work in terms of helping clients achieve what they really want, which is products and innovations that are more successful in the market? So we did a research on research study where we looked at 100 projects, and we identified their pre-optimization concept. So the concept that they typically would have taken the testing. We had them pick that. And then we did a discrete choice exercise where we were comparing the top-rated concepts and their concept to see how preferred they were by the customers. So this was something where we were also actually comparing their top concept to competitors on the market, but we were throwing into the mix the pre-optimization concept because we wanted to see what the performance was for what they would have done with traditional methods. And if you think about, we don't tend to think of the work that we're doing structured in an innovation space, but if you think about this multidimensional space and we're trying to come up with a couple concepts that we're going to test, we're kind of grabbing them out of this haystack, and shouldn't be surprising that the ideas that we grab in that fashion, some of the elements that we pick, we do a good job on. We pick a really good element. Other elements that we pick, we're a little subpar. And so as a result, any variation either way is going to make it slightly better or slightly worse. And we found actually that it was a very average concept. It was 100.4 when we normalized it for the other concepts that we had tested. So people's kind of selection process produces average ideas. Now, it did follow a bell curve. I was diving down into the data, and you definitely saw some good pre-optimization concepts and some bad ones. So sometimes you're going to get lucky and maybe think that that was you, and you're always going to get lucky. But other times you're going to get it really wrong. And so it did work out to be the average. Half the variation made it better, half made it worse. So that's the benefit of optimizing to find the top concept rather than relying on selection process. And we found that then when you looked at those rates for U.S. consumer packaged goods, so we went back through a database of launches from 2003 to 2008 in the U.S., and we found that products that we knew used optimization had almost twice the launch rate, almost twice the success rate, and made 2.6 times the revenue over the first 2 years. So this method does have predictive validity. So if we think about our clients and their sort of desire to find these breakthrough innovations, and yet their sort of lack of knowledge about how do we know that we actually picked the right idea, and you think about all of the great ideas that your qualitative research had provided them that they often skipped over in this ad hoc process, we believe if you can structure it for them in a way where they're thinking of it as this multidimensional space that we call an innovation space, and then they do optimization instead of that manual selection, they're going to get much greater business results than the traditional method. So thank you for your time and attention today.